Welcome to The Pivot, stories of people who made a change. My name is Andrew Osenga, and my guest today is Fred Bahnson. Fred is a writer, he is a filmmaker, he leads a nonprofit in the ecology world, he has been a professor, he does all kinds of things. But I found Fred because he wrote this incredible piece where he followed the pilgrimage of Thomas Merton. And Thomas Merton was this Catholic mystic who lived here in America, in Kentucky for the most part, in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. And, well, he lived longer than that, but that's when he was like a practicing writer. And he wrote all these amazing books. And towards the end of his life, he took this journey from Kentucky out to California and stopped at all these monasteries and these different places. And he wrote about this journey. And it's really just beautiful writings. And Fred took it upon himself to go and follow this path. And they made a film about it. And he wrote this piece where he talks about all these stops on the journey. And it's not really about Thomas Merton. It's more about Fred's own sort of inner dialogue and his spiritual journey, the things he's processing, what he's learning, what he's grieving. It's beautiful. It's so beautiful. We're going to put it in the show notes. You have got to read it. It's incredible. After I read it, I immediately sent the link to my book club because I'm like, you guys have got to read this. They're people who love that kind of thing. And then I was like, I've got to track this guy down. I have to talk to him if he'll talk to me. And thankfully, he was down. He was willing to talk with me. Just realizing how sideways my camera is, and it looks like my guitars are just like, I don't know, wildly floating sideways. We're just going to leave it. Okay. It looked like my whole house is just on a hill. My house is not sideways, but my house is iced over. We are in the middle of the ice apocalypse of 2026. All of Nashville just got hit with this crazy ice storm. It's been just wild. Our power went out Sunday morning about 5 a.m. We woke up. It was really cold in the house. For the next 3 days, we didn't have power. When we woke up Tuesday morning, it was 34 degrees in our house. 34 degrees. We're like, well, we can't keep doing this. So thankfully, we have friends who still had power or had generators, and people would welcome us into their homes to be able to take a shower or help us make food. And yeah, we had, honestly, more people inviting us to their homes than we could possibly go visit, which was incredibly kind. And eventually, we got to my friend Harold's house, and we had brought some bags in, and we were getting settled, and then got a text, hey, lights are back on our street. Oh, amazing. And it took quite a while for the temperature to get from 34 to 65 or whatever, but it did get there. And we're very, very grateful. But it gave me just the smallest little hint of a picture of what it's like to be a refugee. The tiniest little, I feel guilty even saying it, but like just the barest hint of what it's like to grab your stuff and go. And to have to live on the mercy of strangers and not be in your own place where you feel comfortable, where you are in control of your situation. And, the Bible is just full of stories of people living in exile, people living as refugees, whether it's Jesus, whether it's the nation of Israel, the children of God, whether it's us now who are foreigners in a foreign land, who are not yet in the new heavens and the new earth. And the Bible is also so clear about how we are to treat the foreigner and the refugee and those among us who are not from this place. The Bible is not so clear about some of the things we want it to be clear about. But it is so clear about how to treat immigrants and refugees. And yet we, as a nation, just are doing the exact opposite. And it's a shame. And we should be angry about it. And we should do all we can to push back on that. I'm so grateful for the families that hosted our family when we were living in our 2 days of not being able to stay at our house. How do we, those of us who have been complacent in our lives here in America, how do we live as the church who are commanded to love and care for those among us who are not living in their homes? How do we live as the children of God in this country right now? That is the question I keep asking myself. I keep praying about. I don't always know the answer. I don't know the answer. The answers. But I know that I am not being obedient at all if I don't ask myself that question. And I need to change my life because I need to be doing something more than I am doing. Anyway, there's that. Could not say it. Fred Bahnson. This was a great interview. I loved talking with him. He's a really, really, really intelligent man and very kind. Most of this interview, really, truthfully, is me just reading him a quote of something that he wrote that I thought was awesome, and then just telling him that it was great, and then I guess asking him to like say it again to me. I don't know. Just be like, here's something you said. Aren't you smart? And then he has to respond like, yeah, I am so smart. What a great interviewer I am. Somehow it worked out and it was fun. Finally, one last note before the interview. This is going to release Tuesday, February 3rd. If you are listening to this or watching this and you live in Birmingham or near Birmingham, Alabama, tonight at Samford University, 7 p.m., Reed Chapel, Anchor Hymns, the songwriting community, we are doing a live recording of our next album, which are songs all written based on the prayers from the Every Moment Holy books that Doug McKelvey wrote. Our live record will be recorded tonight, February 3rd. Cannot wait. In a couple weeks, I will be able to let you know how that went. It's going to be fantastic. You know what else is fantastic? This conversation with Fred Bahnson. You've heard me talk enough. Let's listen to him. Here we go. My conversation with Fred Bahnson. I found an essay that you wrote a little while ago about Thomas Merton, who's an author that I love, and you recreated one of his journeys, this sort of trek he took out west, and you wrote this brilliant essay about it that just moved me deeply. And I'd love to start by asking you some questions about that essay. The essay is called "On the Road" with Thomas Merton. You won a couple awards even with that essay, right?
Yeah, I think one of them was the Wilbur Award for religious journalism or something like that.
That's
And
awesome.
then, and the one I'm most proud of, I think, is it was included in Best American Travel Writing,
Oh my
chosen
gosh.
by Robert McFarlane, who's a brilliant British nature writer and, sort of a quote unquote secular anthology. So it was cool to see such a, deeply religious Christian piece being included in a kind of popular anthology. So yeah, that was a big honor.
Yeah. Well, when I finished it, I immediately sent it to my book club when we're all authors and we hike and talk about books. And I just immediately sent it to all of them. So you guys have to read this. Um, but I want to be careful not to put all the weight of what moved me so deeply on it, because I know sometimes people will ask me about a record I worked on, 5, 10 years ago, and what they loved about it is not the thing that I loved about it. And so I want to be careful. But I'd love to ask you some questions about this piece. And first, what drew you to Thomas Merton in the first place? Like, for people who aren't familiar with him, who was he and how did you discover him?
Yeah, well, it's funny. I'm in my library here upstairs, and I have pretty much a whole shelf. I'm looking at it now. It's about 3 feet wide, devoted just to Thomas Merton.
Oh
There's
my
probably
gosh.
30 of his books there. Yeah, so I kind of was a Merton junkie for a while, and I read so much of his stuff. And he for me, how did I discover him? I think my friend Paul Ely wrote a book called "The Life You Save May Be Your Own."
Yeah.
about it's kind of a quad biography of Thomas Merton, Dorothy Day, Flannery O'Connor, and Walker Percy,
I've read that.
four great
Yeah.
Catholic writers. Yeah, yeah, wonderful book. And of course, he goes deep into Merton. And so I think that's what kind of got me reading Merton, or maybe a friend gave me Seven Story Mountain. It's been 20 years, I think, since I discovered him, but he's kind of been one of those guides for me in the faith and in life. And he had such a deep artistic view of the world, or way of engaging with the world. He kind of grew up a bohemian, with bohemian artist parents in France, and his parents died at, when he was, before he turned 18, and he lived the kind of wild bohemian life in New York, and then became a monk. So I mean, he had this real kind of adventuresome spirit that I really resonate with, and that's very much how I conceive of my own faith journey, is this kind of, it's this unfolding adventure. It's a quest, it's a
Yeah.
pilgrimage.
And for
And
people, he became a monk like not in the 1600s, but like in
no, like
like
right in the 40s.
yeah,
Yeah,
like he lived in Kentucky.
right. Yeah, left, like hopped on a train, left New York, and signed up at this monastery. I think he went once and then came back and then returned for good. But yeah, really, and he was corresponding with all these amazing writers and thinkers of his time, from Boris Pasternak in Russia to James Baldwin, in the U.S.,
Wow.
and
Yeah.
engaged deeply in the civil rights movement through those letters. And yeah, really,
Huh.
really fascinating figure.
Wow.
Yeah, so so I guess that kind of, I'd been reading Merton, and to the sort of genesis of the On the Road with Thomas Merton essay, it occurred to me at a certain point he'd made this trip out west toward the end of his life. In fact, the last year of his life,
Hmm.
1968. He traveled in May of 1968 out to Christ in the Desert Monastery and to Redwoods Monastery, in New Mexico and California, and wrote this beautiful little journal called Wood Shore Desert. And Annie Dillard called it one of the great journals ever published. It's very short, very sort of cryptic and prismatic, accompanied by his photographs. And he kind of laid out his itinerary on that trip, this 2-week trip out west. And he stopped at City Lights Books in San Francisco and met Lawrence Ferlinghetti, famous beat poet, and kind of had this 2-week, Western road trip. And I was like, wow, what if I could recreate that, and maybe even meet some of the people that he met.
Wow.
And so I pitched the idea to Emergence Magazine and convinced them to also let me bring along a filmmaker, my friend Jeremy Seifert, and we've since collaborated in a number of films together. And so Jeremy made this short film, and I sort of played the part of Thomas Merton and put on a denim shirt and walked around, read some of his work, and so we had this kind of multimedia story that emerged from that. And yeah, it was an amazing trip. Got to meet a couple of the nuns who Merton met at Redwoods Monastery. They still had a crush on him, 50 years later. Um,
That's funny.
yeah,
Well, what I love about the piece is that you're not just giving a biography of Thomas Merton. Like the piece isn't really about him. It's about you processing your own journey as you're going on the same route that he went on.
yeah,
And it's this really beautiful uh, sort of work of introspection. And I guess maybe it's interesting to me because so much of what you're wrestling with in that piece are things that I'm wrestling with. Even deep theological ideas of um, just what is your faith? And I'm going to read a quote to you. You said, Merton helped me articulate a belief I'd long suspected, that the core of our being is not rotten, as my Protestant upbringing had insisted, but is a place of untouched beauty and wholeness, reserved for God alone, a place beyond ego that no evil can touch. You wrote that, and I read it on my computer, but I would have like underlined it and circled it and cut it out and hung it on my walls. Like that. is so beautiful. And that's an idea that I have been thinking about and journaling about and wrestling with. What does that mean to you? And what tectonic plates are shifting in that idea to you?
Yeah. Well, thank you. First of all, that's I'm so glad it resonated. And yeah, I think that realization, reading Merton and also talking with the sisters there at Redwoods, and I quoted one of the sisters later in the piece, Abbot Kathy, who said something along similar lines. But that's really an ancient idea especially in the Eastern Church, that when we're before baptism, the demons, Satan, evil, however you want to conceive that, can work on the human heart inside us. And after baptism, evil is cast out. There's no more demons within us working at the level of the heart. They're outside us, working on us through temptations and thoughts and any number of challenges that we face, in our lives. And but yet it's outside of us. And this comes, I believe, from Diodokos of Photiki. I'm probably mispronouncing his name, but an early Christian writer in the 5th century, I'm going to say. You'll have to fact check this. But it's
I won't.
long been it's an idea in the Eastern Church, and not an idea, but a belief that through baptism we are rid of that kind of inner evil, inner demonic energy working on us. And so forever after baptism, we still encounter it, but it's at a slight remove. It's outside us. It's not in us. And the Protestant theology I grew up with, I grew up evangelical, and my parents were medical missionaries in Nigeria with the Dutch Reformed Church. So very kind of
Mm.
Calvinist
Yeah.
theology that I grew up with. And that theology, at least as I received it, was all about original sin, and sort of, you are stained to the core. You are rotten to the core of your being. That's kind of the idea I received, at least from my Calvinist upbringing. And it never really resonated. It just didn't ring true to me. It didn't ring true. I knew I was sinful. I knew, I screwed up, but I kept thinking, if we're created in the image of God, how can that be true, that we're also rotten to the core? It just didn't make sense. And sure enough, discovering the Eastern Church and its theology um, of those demons being cast out of us through baptism, it was just a kind of an awakening and a relief. And yeah, so I'm not sure what else I can say about that, but Merton embodied that. Merton, I think,
But
had
that's not,
more
yeah,
of
that's
a
not his idea. That's something he was discovering
yeah,
himself.
he was kind of channeling that through those early
Yeah.
Christian writers.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that is a fascinating idea and something that I've been reading more and more about because I grew up in a very similar, not Dutch Reform, but with those same ideas. And um,
Yeah.
yeah, I think that's part of why I resonate with it. Just recognizing in your piece some of the reading that I've been doing on my own. Um, well, you also talk about a shared similarity of your childhood, of yours and Merton's, which was this idea of boarding school and isolation, which is something that's pretty unique. I don't know many people that have boarding school in their histories, but you did. Would you tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah. Um, I grew up in Nigeria as a missionary kid. Well, I lived there for 3 years of my childhood, from age
How
10 to
old were you?
12.
Oh,
Yeah,
sorry.
so
Yeah.
10 is 10 years old is when we went over there. My parents had this really dramatic kind of calling, you could say, to go be missionaries in Nigeria. And they both arrived at that prayerfully, independently of each other, and sort of were shocked to discover that they had both been having the same ideas for months through dreams and prayer and conversation. And so they ended up moving our family when I was 10. We had, my parents had just built a pretty nice house here in Montana. My dad was a physician, making a comfortable doctor's salary, and they built the proverbial doctor's mansion and then sold it a couple months later for a huge loss. So it was a pretty dramatic move. And I don't they had no idea what they were getting into, as I, some of their letters later confirmed, but they had this really, I think for them, a really powerful 3 years of service. For me, it was this really radical break from a, warm, comfortable, loving childhood to being sort of cast into this hostel in Jos, Nigeria, with 20 other kids, K through 12, and a set of very unloving house parents, who were not really parents. They were essentially guardians who made sure we were fed and clothed and housed, got us to school, but there was very little love in that abode. And so I really resonated with Merton writing about his own boarding school experience and just the abandonment he felt and the loneliness and living with other kids in an environment where there was no love. Yeah, and
How
that's
much of your
also.
time, how much of a year was spent in that boarding school versus sort of like with your parents in Nigeria?
So I lived at Hillcrest. Mountain View was the hostel where we lived. Hillcrest was the kind of school, and each denomination had a hostel, and they would all send their kids to Hillcrest, the school, just a mile or two from the different hostels in town. And so I lived there probably 10 months out of the year. I think we had 2 months off in the summer, 2.5 months. Christmas break, they had a little mission plane, so they would fly us home for Christmas break and summers. My parents came up every 2 months or so for a long weekend. But yeah, just not much connection with my family for those 3 years. And I think that was where, to frame it more positively, I think that was really where I had an early intimation of God's presence. That sense of, okay, I'm on my own. Like I'm living with other people, but they're not. I'm getting very little nurture from them, especially, I mean, definitely no nurture from adults. Like we kids kind of nurtured each other. We became a little tribe.
Wow.
And
Yeah.
but I had to really learn how to become self-sufficient, and a lot of that was learning to pray, just kind of crying out in pain to God, and feeling the love come back at me,
Yeah.
feeling this kind of undergirding mercy in my life. Um, that was very palpable to me as a 10-year-old.
So when you got back to the States, you were 12. How do you think that shaped you, going into high school or, however, whatever grade you walked back into when you got back to America?
I mean, I came back sort of a dorky mission kid. I was sheltered, came back to ninth grade American high school, and
Did you come back to
all
Montana?
we came back to North Carolina for a year. My dad was so burned out as a physician. He'd been working, 16-hour days, and he'd go work a 12-hour shift and then come home and then get called in at 3 a.m. for an emergency to the hospital. I mean, he was just totally exhausted. So he worked some emergency room shifts that first year back in North Carolina, but he mostly just kind of chilled and decompressed. And then we moved back to Montana when I was in 10th grade. And yeah, it was definitely a shock coming back to American life.
I know that you ended up becoming a professor and teaching at a divinity school. How did you get there from being a sort of a dorky kid, mission kid, uh, in high school in North Carolina and Montana? What was that journey like?
Yeah, so I coming back to Montana high school and college, I went to Montana State here and kind of spent all of my 20s as a skiing and climbing bum. I did a lot of
Oh, cool.
alpinism and kind of was in full on mountain adventurer mode. Climbed all up and down the American and Canadian Rockies and the Bolivian Andes, and
Oh my
yeah,
gosh.
really worked just enough to fund the next expedition, you know.
What kind of
And
climbing do you do?
so I did a lot of ice climbing in the winter and rock climbing in the summer, and then alpine climbing where you're sort of doing both throughout the year. And yeah, I had a very close friend die,
Oh my
and that
gosh.
kind of was a reality check that sort of put an end to my climbing career. But that was really how I spent my 20s. And at a certain point, I started thinking, grad school. I was an English major. I was a writer and a reader, and so I was kind of naturally drawn to to wanting to learn. And I ended up my uh, pastor at the time. I was just kind of attending a local Lutheran church that had a Sunday evening jazz service. It was very musically focused. Yeah, it was a beautiful jazz service on Sunday evenings, and that pastor had done a PhD at the University of Chicago in theology, and he kind of encouraged me to think about a theology degree in MDiv, and ended up applying to a couple of divinity schools. Ended up going to Duke Divinity for 2 years and got a master's in theology. And it was really more of I didn't have this calling, quote unquote, to be a pastor. It was more of just wanting to understand this faith that had shaped me and that I sort of couldn't get away from. I tried getting away from it in my 20s. I think a lot of my climbing was
Mm-hmm.
kind of an escape in some ways. Um, and
Huh.
yeah, so I ended up going to divinity school, and it was, best 2 years in terms of my education, compared to college and everything before that. And and then I ended up, so that's kind of, the theological education piece. But while I was in divinity school, I read read Wendell Berry,
Man.
and
What did you
sure,
read? What Wendell Berry?
I read Sex, Economy, Freedom, and Community. That was the first thing I read. And I was just blown away. I was like, wow, this guy's awesome.
Yeah.
More of him. So I went through a whole Wendell Berry phase, and he really kind of helped me understand the whole agrarian way of looking at the world and land care and that kind of, that plus an experience in Chiapas, Mexico as a human rights observer right after divinity school. That was kind of the deal clincher for me, where I had what I call my agrarian conversion, and I wrote about that in Soil and Sacrament.
Yeah.
Time
Yeah.
in Chiapas, and then coming back to the U.S. and learning how to farm and helping start a low income community garden, and that sort of led to me helping start the program at Wake Divinity.
Well, okay, I want to ask you about Soil and Sacrament now that we're there. That's a book that you wrote a while ago now, but you traveled to four different communities to write that book and four different faith communities. And I just thought this whole idea was fascinating. Um, would you tell us a little bit about just the idea behind that book and your research and what you learned from that book?
Yeah, so I'd helped start this low income community garden in North Carolina called Anatoth Community Garden, and I started writing about it as I was doing it. Published an essay in Orion Magazine, and it sort of gave me the idea. There I learned about other faith communities who were starting farms and
Mhm.
growing their own food and kind of reconnecting with the land, but in a very faith focused way. And and I was really fascinated by that whole kind of growing movement. You could say this was back in 2006, 2007, and 8. It was right around the time when Michael Pollan's book came out.
Oh yeah.
Um, Blanking on the title now, but it
What was
was
that?
it's
I was
a
thinking
pretty
Eat,
well
Pray,
known.
Love. Like it's not that. Um,
Yeah.
what was that book? Yeah. I know the
Yeah.
one you're
Anyway,
talking about. Yeah.
you know what I'm talking about. Yeah. So that was I started just researching different faith communities, and I had like 12 different places I wanted to visit, narrowed it down to
Hmm.
four. I decided to do one per season. And so I visited a group of Catholic monks, Cistercian monks, who were of the same community that Thomas Merton was in terms of the same Cistercian brotherhood, and visited them. They grew oyster mushrooms and shiitake mushrooms for their livelihood. I visited a Pentecostal farm out in Washington State. I went to a sort of Protestant inflected community garden in North Carolina, much like the one I'd started, but up in the mountains. And I visited a Jewish community up in Connecticut, and yeah, wrote about all those, and then wrote about kind of my alternating chapters with my own journey and my own sort of discovery of this agrarian way of life that I found so beautiful.
Yeah. Well, and how did that shape the work that you went on to do with the garden that you were leading in that community?
So I wrote the book after I'd left that community. So
Oh, you
I
did. Okay. I got the
started
timing
that
wrong.
garden and directed that project for 4 years. And the kind of beginnings of the book happened in 2009. I had a this really amazing 2-year fellowship with the Kellogg Foundation. It was called the Food and Society Policy Fellowship. It's basically like a 2-year writing grant, and it allowed me to travel and research. And yeah, it was a huge gift. It's a massive gift, and just a real slingshot forward as a writer. And so that's kind of when I started doing the research. Um, got another grant after that to write the book, and and a book deal with Simon and Schuster. So there was kind of a couple years where I was just piecing it together
Yeah.
to get the book written. And then writing that book was partly what led to getting recruited to start this program at Wake Divinity, the food health and ecological well-being program. And I directed that for the next 9 years.
Yeah.
And it was a yeah, a really amazing time getting to meet a lot of different um, pastors and community leaders and people working in this kind of burgeoning food and faith movement, and increasingly a kind of climate solutions movement among faith communities, and did that for 9 years. In the end, I felt like I'd taken the program as far as I could within the confines of a university divinity school. It was really more of an outward focused program. So
Hmm.
it was kind of a natural winding down. And that's when we moved back to Montana in 2020.
Wow. Now, were you teaching, or was all your work sort of community focused and more structural?
Yeah, teaching and community focus. It was kind of a combined job. I don't have a PhD, so I was a professor of the practice. That's kind of the designation they use if you don't have a PhD. So I taught some courses, taught a course in food and faith, and then taught a spiritual autobiography course too. And that was probably the most enjoyable class that I taught. Was modern. I called it modern spiritual writing, and so we read a host of writers like Thomas Merton, and more modern writers like Mark Richard, who wrote this beautiful memoir called House of Prayer Number Two. I'd highly recommend that to your readers. It's all written in the second person, which is really hard to pull off. But
Oh, wow.
so I
About he
thought,
wrote an autobiography in the second person.
yeah, yeah. The first sentence is, "Say you are a special child," and he was born with kind of hip deformities, and growing up in the South, they called him special, But um, anyway, it's well worth a read. I won't spoil it for you, but yeah, so I had my students read spiritual autobiographies like that, and then had them write their own. And so it was part writing class, part lit class.
Oh, that's amazing. Well, because you work, I mean, a lot of your work is at that sort of nexus of ecology and, you know, caring for the earth and spiritual formation. And how do you see those two working together? Like, maybe that's a dumb question. Maybe the question is, I'm not sure really how I want to ask this question. You said you had this, what did you call it? An ecological awakening? What did you call
Agrarian
that?
conversion,
Your
but yeah,
agrarian conversion.
you could call it an ecological awakening as well. Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, how do you see sort of the ecological movement and your spiritual journey sort of working hand in hand. What has that journey been like for you personally?
Yeah. So for me, um, let me see if I can answer that. And I think this is where language doesn't really get at our experience, because whenever we start talking about ecology or the environment, or the environmental movement or any of that stuff, it becomes this kind of thing. It
It
becomes
feels
this ism.
political. Yeah.
Feels political, environmentalism, right? And I've sought from, you know all my life, I could say, to get beyond isms and get to the pure drop, the direct experience. And that's a lot of
Pure
what I try
drop.
to do as a writer, and just place the reader there with me in the moment. And
Hmm.
that's why narrative, to me, is so much more powerful than ideas or argument or diatribe. We
Well,
need
it's funny
narrative.
you talk about Wendell Berry. Like when I read Wendell Berry's novels, I'm like, I want to go move to a
Yeah,
farm. And when I read his essays, often I'm like, this guy's just an angry old man.
yeah, exactly. No, I had the same reaction. I mean, he's a great essayist and brilliant
Y-
arguer, and his
Yeah,
father was a lawyer, I believe. But at a certain point, you feel like you're reading the same argument over and over.
yeah. But I read
Whereas with
Hannah Coulter and I'm just
novels,
like, we're selling
yeah,
everything, you know? Yeah.
right, right. Or Jaber Crow. I mean, who
Oh,
doesn't want to get a haircut from Jaber Crow?
right?
And yeah, so I think that's where um, we need movements, we need people discussing ideas, but I think with Christianity and the natural world, I was part of this whole movement for many years that was called kind of the creation care movement or food and
Yeah.
faith, and it has these different names. But it's always, for most people, it's always going to seem like, oh, that's just this thing that those people are interested in. That's their little niche, sort of
Hmm.
like it becomes relegated to a sort of a club, that certain people are part of. But I think what I've tried to do, and this is where I'm influenced by writers like Barry Lopez and just a slew of other quote unquote nature writers, is we are nature. We're nature looking back at itself. We are the environment is constantly moving in and out of us. And if I if all of the cells in my body were to disappear, I would still look more or less like myself just from the bacteria on my skin, right? So the bacteria, which is not me, is on me. So and it's inside me. It's inside of us through the our microbiome and our GI tract. So we are nature, and there's no dividing line. And that's where I think the church I grew up in, uh, it just felt so cerebral, and was very much a faith from the shoulders up. And the faith I'm drawn to, and the faith I've moved to later in my life, joining the Eastern Orthodox Church, is very much an embodied experience. You're doing things, you're smelling things, you're watching and hearing, and all of your senses are engaged. And I think that's the faith I think we need if we're going to have any chance of surviving climate change and the biodiversity crisis and any number of sort of ecological crises that we're facing that are of our own making. And so, to get back to a more embodied faith, we have to get beyond the isms and thinking that the environment is something out there.
Yeah. Yeah. That's really, it's really thoughtful. So I've, for almost probably for about 2 years, probably about maybe this week, I've been hiking every day. And I live in a city. There's a lake, a
In
state
Nashville,
park. Yeah, in Nashville. There's a lake about 2 miles from my house. Um, that's a that I takes me about an hour and a half, and I just, as a sort of a spiritual practice, I've just decided I'm going to go there every morning and hike. Sometimes I'm with people, sometimes I'm not. I was there this right before we talked. I was out there, and I've told people it's changed my life, and people have said how. I'm like, I don't know. I don't know how to explain it to you. I could, I think I can write songs about it. I think I could play guitar about it. I don't know how to explain it to you. Don't know how to put it into words, but I know that I have to get out there. It's hard to put that stuff into words. Um, and in some of your writing, you even talk about um, how sort of the pen can't describe, um, what some of those journeys are like. And uh, I you can probably hear my dog. There's some nature for right there. Well, on this journey that you're on, you've also talked about your move into the Eastern Orthodox Church.
Yeah. So coming back full circle to where we began with Thomas Merton, I think he was one of the key figures who led me to the Eastern Church. He wrote this beautiful book called Wisdom of the Desert,
Hmm.
and it's a collection of the sayings of the Desert Fathers, fourth and fifth century monks in Egypt and Palestine and in North Africa. And he wrote this short little introduction. I'd highly recommend it. The Wisdom of the Desert, Thomas
Wisdom of
Merton.
the desert.
And in that intro, he asked this question: what can we gain by sailing to the moon if we cannot cross the abyss that separates us from ourselves? And I think Eastern Christianity has always had this very inward orientation to the faith, and the kingdom of God is within you. And which is not to say that it's a solely inward private affair by any means. It's not. But I think so much of the Christianity I grew up with was very outward facing, and um, and also very cerebral. And I think I was very drawn to the early Christian writers who were part of the Eastern Church, the Desert Fathers and Mothers, and the writings in the Philokalia and Saint Isaac of Syria, and on down to this book, The Art of Prayer, which has a lot of quotes by a Russian monk named Theophan the Recluse. And yeah, The Art of Prayer, an Orthodox anthology compiled by Igumen Chariton of Velamo. Um, and
Write
I
that
was
down.
just very drawn. I'd always been, not always, but I'd say for the last 10 years, I've had more and more of a contemplative hunger, I would say.
Yeah.
Uh, Contemplative prayer and silence and stillness, and the Jesus prayer became a big part of my prayer life and my own healing from my experience in boarding school. I would say therapy and the Jesus prayer were really what helped heal a lot of the wounds of my childhood. And so, it was really this discovery for me of the Eastern Orthodox Church is they're all about the Jesus prayer, and
Yeah.
and so much of the contemplative mystical orientation I was already hungry for. And when we moved back to Montana, I'd been to Divine Liturgy a few times here and there, but it always felt very ethnic. There was a Ukrainian monastery
Hmm.
north of Asheville that we visited, I don't know, 6 or 7 years ago when I lived in Western North Carolina, and it felt very Ukrainian. It was cool, it was beautiful, but felt very ethnic. And likewise, I went to a Greek Orthodox church. It felt very Greek, and coming to Montana, we went to this OCA church, Orthodox Church of America, and it's kind of the pan-Orthodox, everybody kind of orthodoxy, and a lot of converts from the Protestant world. And I was so moved by the Divine Liturgy and the singing, and um, it just felt very reverent and worshipful. And I think I'd been just really hungry for that and missing that in the Protestant churches I'd been to, which felt much more cerebral, much more focused on assenting to this or that doctrine or belief or what the preacher said that day. And Orthodoxy was much more about the experience of the liturgy itself. the homily is only about 5 minutes. It's really not about the priest in some ways. The priest is really just there to channel the divine presence through the liturgy and through the Eucharist. So all of that was just very appealing to me and attractive. And I spent a couple years though before I joined, because I had sort of decided when we moved back to Montana, when COVID hit, my family and I just kind of stopped going to church. I mean, churches were closed for one thing, but I didn't really miss it. I missed the community I had experienced, but I'd reached a point where I just sort of said, I don't know if I'm going back to church. We were doing a little house church with my wife and I and our three boys. Before school each day, we would read a psalm and pray the Jesus prayer together in silence for 5 minutes.
Mm.
And it was this beautiful little daily liturgy that we had during COVID.
Yeah.
Uh, but at a certain point, I began thinking, okay, maybe I'll try a church. And that's when I went to St. Anthony's and never looked back.
Hmm. Yeah, I've
Excuse me.
read some of the things that you wrote during that time, and I mean, you could feel your frustration and your sort of breaking with some of that
Yeah.
tradition. There's one quote that stuck out to me just because it made me laugh out loud. I, like the Kardashians, the American Christian family has become obsessed with its own profile. Which you wrote that in Harper's, and I laughed. Um, but because I get it. This sort of self obsession sometimes of empire, of
Yeah.
sort of growth for growth's sake, or commerce and image. And we've found ourselves in an Anglican community kind of for similar reasons. I think you and I are on very similar journeys. Um, I resonate with so much of this, and I love that you're documenting all this in such beautiful writing. It's really a gift to so many people. What drives you to share this stuff publicly? What's your thought process as you are going through these things in your private life and then thinking about sharing them in a magazine? What's the food chain there?
Yeah. Yeah. That's a good way to put it. What's the food chain? Yeah. So I've been very, to me, it's a writerly urge to do that, to use your own story as a window through which the reader can look onto some larger vista behind. So ultimately, you want to be the clear pane of glass that the reader looks through. You're not the final destination of the reader's gaze. If at the end of the day the story is just about what happened to Fred Bahnson, then I failed.
Yeah,
It's not a me. I'm the vehicle, and I think that's where I've learned so much from other writers, where they place themselves in the story, but the story is not in the end about them. It's not about, um, you know, yeah, it's not about them. It's about the larger story you're trying to tell. And for me, that larger story is almost always about what God is doing in our lives, what we how we live as people of faith. Um, and I'm also, but a good bit of my writing has been written for people of no faith, and so I think
yeah,
I want to
yeah,
present a vision of the faith that maybe challenges some of their stereotypes of what a Christian is. And I think that's why characters like Merton are so powerful, because I mean, he got a young woman pregnant when he was, in college at Columbia, and he had an affair with a nurse when he was a monk. I mean, the guy was kind of a mess in some ways. Like we all are. We're all kind of a mess. We just, some of us hide it better than others. And so I think the personal writing I've done, or the times when I place myself in the story, it's to help the reader, I hope, be able to identify and be able to place themselves there. When I traveled to Mali following this Benedictine monk on his quest to preserve ancient manuscripts, I mean, he's kind of this larger than life Indiana Jones figure. And the me in that story, the narrator, is kind of this weak, wimpy, that in the end, I didn't follow him out into the streets of Gal, the town in Mali, because it was too dangerous. I was scared. I mean, it was like terrorists all around and roadside bombs. I'm like, I'm not a war journalist. What am I doing here? And this is a piece I published in Harper's Magazine called "Letter from Mali," and the subtitle is "Guardians of Memory." And I wrote about my own Nigerian childhood in that, in a small way. I wrote about some of my boarding school experience in that.
Oh
But
yeah, I haven't read that piece yet. Yeah,
that's where, I think the question is not, uh, I always sort of ask, okay, why am I in this story? I don't have to be in every story. And a lot of things I've written, I'm not. I'm just kind of a
sure.
more third person journalist. But if my own story can help illuminate the larger story I'm trying to tell, then maybe it's useful. But you have to be very selective in who that I is that you craft as your narrator. You don't need to tell them everything about yourself. You're constantly selecting just the right detail to include, and a lot of it is taking out things that don't belong there.
Oh man, yeah, that's the hardest and best part of writing, isn't it? The scalpel after you put all the things
Yeah.
down on the page.
Yeah. I love
Yeah,
editing. I love being edited. Having a really good editor is such a gift, because
it's the best.
I'm sure you experience this as a musician, having a good producer who can kind of help you shape the material.
Yes.
It's
Yeah. Well, I just wrote my first book too, and I had a few author friends who tell me like, oh, the editing process is brutal, but you get to a point where when you get a draft back and you see a page that doesn't have much red on it, and you're like, what, did you not do your job? You know?
not
Yeah.
read this.
There's no way I did this. I got this all right, you know? Yeah.
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 There's a kind of masochistic pain in the editing process. Like I hate it, but I also love it because I know it's going to get the material better in the end.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's Now, do you ever do that work for other people?
Then, yeah, I did a lot of editing when I was teaching, just reading student papers, a lot of, proofreading and helping them craft their essays. So yeah, I've done editing. I mean, to me, editing and writing and reading, it's kind of all of a piece.
Yeah.
It's hard to know where the fine line is, but yeah.
Yeah. I was talking just yesterday with a friend of mine who's written a number of books, and he said the favorite thing an editor ever said to him was a note on a line. It said, "This sentence feels like a hat on a hat." And that's pretty funny. Um,
Like,
well, you've also started working in films, and obviously you made the film around this Merton piece, but then you and your the co-director have done a number of films together. You did The Forest Beyond, and you've done a few others now. Tell me what's that process been like, and what have you been most proud of? What's been the most challenging in that work?
yeah. Yeah, so Jeremy Seifert has been my collaborator, and he's really the true filmmaker as director and DP, director of photography. So he's the guy behind the camera. I'm the guy who's increasingly helping to direct. So our last film, The Forest Beyond, we co-directed it. Before that, I was more of a producer and a writer. So we've kind of had this collaboration that started with the Merton film, and I've been progressively getting more involved in each successive film. So we did a film in
That's cool.
Ethiopia together called The Church Forests of Ethiopia. I wrote a long essay about it, um, and I helped produce that film. That one aired in the op doc section of the New York Times, which was really fun to see. But yeah, we do these kind of 10 to 15-minute mini documentaries, and I'm the guy behind the camera doing the interviewing. I sort of find the story, with the Merton piece and with the Ethiopia piece. We did a film on the writer Barry Lopez, who I mentioned. The film's
Yeah.
called Horizon, a biopic, and I wrote
Yeah, I
that
saw that.
story.
That
And
was beautiful.
thank you. Yeah, it was really fun. So I kind of do the writing and story piece, and Jeremy he turns that into really a lush visual film. And so it's been a real collaboration, real joy. Hope we can keep keep doing it. We're always sort of scheming, okay, how can we get paid to go have another fun adventure to make a cool film, you know? It's like
Yeah,
we're like little kids in that way. We just want to
that's
go have adventure.
that's fun. Are you guys working on anything right now?
Nothing in the works. We're always kind of scheming.
Yeah.
You know, hopefully there's a Netflix producer listening and they want to have us go do a series. That would be our dream. But no, nothing in the works right now.
Yeah, that's fun. Well, what I know a few years ago you guys moved back out to Montana. What led you guys out there?
I grew up here and my wife and I have three boys, teenage boys, and we just in 2020 realized, hey, COVID was starting up. Um, I'd been sort of working on my wife for years to move back to Montana. We we met in North Carolina and lived there for 20 years, and yeah, finally kind of wore her down, and she agreed to move out here. So moved back here in 2020, and I've gotten to sort of raise my boys in this beautiful place I grew up in, the Greater Yellowstone ecosystem, which is just brimming with life and things that can kill you, and mountains that humble you, and rivers that make your heart sing. So it's a good place to be.
Amazing. What are some of your favorite things to do with your boys out there in the Montana wilderness?
We do a lot of skiing in the wintertime. We do a lot of day hikes in the summer and some backpacking trips, mountain biking. We spend a lot of time in the mountains. We live near the Bridger Mountains, which are a north-south mountain chain. Highest peak is 9,000 some feet. And so it's pretty easy to get up high relatively
Yeah.
quickly. And so, yeah, we spend a lot of time there on the trails and just being out in the mountains. Um, we'll take little desert trips down to Utah and you know, Escalante Canyon and Moab, places like that. Go down there for spring break sometimes. Yeah, we try to be outside as much as we can. It's good for boys,
It's
especially.
incredible.
To,
Do you
that
encourage or discourage their mountain climbing?
definitely discourage. Our oldest, yeah, our oldest son got really into rock climbing. Thankfully, he was mostly just in the gym, you know, gym climbing, which is
Oh yeah,
great.
yeah,
That's
yeah.
he's safe. Uh, he's not super, you know, he's not a big risk seeker, so he didn't really want to go out and do the big scary stuff I did. And that was a relief. So yeah, I kind of always downplayed my climbing with my kids. I think because I lost a good friend, um, you know, in 1999, a good friend of mine died in the mountains, not with me, but with another friend of ours. And I think that was just, boy, you know, I'd had enough close calls in my 15 years as a climber that it's kind of like if you're on that path and you're progressing, the risk just keeps increasing. It doesn't decrease, you know,
Ah,
and there's all these objective hazards like avalanches or rock fall or um, any number of things you can't control. And so,
yeah,
yeah, I sort of dissuaded my boys from that.
yeah, yeah. I've watched all those documentaries. They're crazy. Yeah.
Yeah, like Meru and Free Solo, and
I mean,
there's
they're
all kinds of
a
stuff.
good watch, but it's terrifying.
Yeah,
Yeah, make your palms sweat.
yeah.
Well, Fred, thank you so much for taking time to chat. This has just been
Thank
a
you,
huge
Andy.
gift.
Yeah.
I got one last question. If people would like to get into Thomas Merton, if they'd like to read a book of his, what would you suggest they start with?
Would start with either Thoughts in Solitude. That's a very short book with just little 1 or 2 page reflections. Thoughts in Solitude. That's the one that has his famous prayer where he kind of riffs on Psalm 23. He says, "My Lord, my God, I have no idea where I'm going, but I know you're with me." Uh, yeah, Thoughts in Solitude. New Seeds of Contemplation is also really good, and The Wisdom of the Desert. I think, and in that book, in that intro, The Wisdom of the Desert, he says something like, if the reader enjoys the taste of pure water found here, then let them follow that stream to its source.
Hmm.
And so, you know, if you like what I'm saying, don't stop with me. Go back to these early Christian writers, and that's a lot of what I've done since then. I took his advice. Yeah.
I love that. Well, we'll put links in the show notes to a bunch of your writing because people need to definitely read that. But,
Wow.
well, thank you so much. This has been a real treat, and it's great to get to talk with you, Fred.
Thank you.
Well, that was pretty awesome. Huh. Dude's amazing. I don't know about you, but when I was done with this interview, I immediately went to Amazon and I bought I think 3 books. I literally had this notebook right here that I have right here. And I was under the desk. I don't know if you could tell if you're watching the video, but I was just scribbling books as he was writing. It's like, okay, ooh, what's that? What's that? What's that? I tried to decipher my chicken scratch after the interview and went and bought some books on Amazon. Hopefully now you know why you want to read that Thomas Merton article that he wrote. Really so incredible. Also, you should read Thomas Merton. So we're going to put a bunch of links in the show notes today. Just a lot of books. So, Amazon's going to make a lot of money off of this interview, I hope. But maybe we'll try to link to the Rabbit Room or something like that. But we'll also link to my Substack, which is where you can support the show. Some of you do support financially and everything, and that is amazing and so helpful. Thank you. Helps us do this. And but we are just grateful for everybody who checks the show out and watches and listens and reads the Substacks. It's a huge gift to be able to make this with you and for you and to be doing this together. We'll be back with another great episode next week. And stay safe, stay warm, care for one another. Let's pray that we are able to do that better as individuals, as churches, as communities, as a nation. Thank you all. Grace and peace. Now, go do something awesome.